When we are hydrodissecting the mind, what we're injecting is perspective. And through perspective, we get enough space from the topic to actually see it with more clarity. Hi, welcome to our second podcast. I'm here with Barb from BioReset Medical, and I'm Cali with a little bit of chill. And we're here today to talk to you about this concept of scar tissue and mental programming, and perhaps a new way to take a look at that. So Barb and I were just chatting, and we wanted to make sure to record and share this idea of part of what we're teaching is like hydrodissection for the mind. So it's this concept of we have like scar tissue or past events that can affect us physically, like, sports injury or whatnot that we want to heal from. But also we can have mental or emotional things that have created scar tissue. One extreme example would be PTSD, but there are many layers of types of mental scar tissue. So we wanted to play with that imagery with you today and talk about getting a little perspective and a little space from some of those areas that we might be just a little locked in or a little tight, just like scar tissue is when it regrows.
Yeah, it's a really great way to think about that, because we're all carrying lots of wonderful experiences from our past that inform us in our present. But part of those things can be scar tissue, and those can be things that people said to us at certain points in our lives that we were hurt by. And then one of the things that we do as people is sort of stuff that, because, society tells us to, get over it or be strong. And I think that acknowledging that we're all perfect beings and that we also have lots of scars on all levels. And as we look at, if you think about a tablecloth that sort of perfectly lays on the table, and if you take one thread of it and catch it in, an earring or a fork, and you start to pull on it, it affects the fabric of the entire tablecloth. And so while this might be a tiny millimeter bit of a scar in this tablecloth, the implications of it can go throughout the whole piece of fabric. And our bodies are like that. So having a scar, in your knee can affect your shoulder and your opposite foot and your head position, because everybody's trying to help out. It's where the body is this amazing efficient codependency mechanism. And we do the same thing emotionally. So a little scar can cause repercussions and ripples that can go throughout our whole mental and emotional and spiritual being. So being able to identify those and then have a way to help without effort release those can cause the entire being or the entire tablecloth to be able to settle down and be at ease.
Oh, love the imagery. You always bring the best imagery. So fun. So playing with a real sort of concrete example, I thought we might play with today the coin that is not enough and I'm the answer to everything. So the idea that some of us may have had messaging or experiences that said, I'm not enough, I'll never be enough, or, some version of that, not good enough, etc. And then the other side of the coin, which is, I'm supposed to have all the answers. I'm the center of all of it. It revolves around me. And therefore, I'm the answer to everything. And though our experience of that, either with ourselves or other people, may seem like it's two completely different things, for fun today, let's play with the concept of that being the same coin, just two extreme manifestations of the same coin. So if we unpack this or hydrodissect it, we can start to do the very first step of recognizing these patterns or these scar tissues by acknowledging, just like you said, recognizing that we may have one of these patterns or
several.
Or we feel like we're supposed to have all the answers and all the pressure that comes with that. So therefore we trample on everybody else's ideas, and it seems like nobody else has answers because we're really not making room for that. And then the far extreme where we may have some great ideas and information and answers, but we're not really willing to bring them to the table because our programming or our scar tissue says, no, you can't. That can't possibly be a good idea. So just pausing with that, Barb, would you mind explaining a little bit, just briefly, what hydrodissection is in the purest form of what's done at BioReset? And then maybe share with us a little bit about how when we are hydrodissecting the mind, how what we're injecting is perspective. And through perspective, we get enough space from the topic to be able to actually see it with more clarity.
Yeah, beautiful. That would be, I think, a super useful way to look at it. So hydrodissection is the term that we use, and it was actually coined by Dr. Clark, who is one of our colleagues and mentors in this field of being able to look at the body as a series of planes. So using a high-end ultrasound, we're able to see the tissues of the body, so the skin, and then underneath the skin, the fascia and the nerves and the muscles and the fluids and the bones, and be able to, for instance, if you had a scar on your elbow, if you put the ultrasound probe on your elbow, you would see on a screen that was a nerve in there that was larger than normal because it was trapped in a piece of scar tissue. I broke my elbow, many years ago, which is why I thought of this. And I used to have pain until it was treated with hydrodissection. So that nerve is in there. It's trapped in tissues, and it's not getting enough fluid and not getting enough sugar. So it's feeling hungry and tired and kind of trapped and pissed off. And what we do with hydrodissection is take a needle and go in, not directly into it, but go into the plane of the tissues and shoot fluid. And that fluid can be anything from just a simple dextrose solution, but more frequently we'll use something like peptides or some kind of exosomes or placental matrix, which are biologics that are super healing. And that you start to see the tissues open and the nerve will be floating. And now it's able to start getting nutrition and be able to breathe and start to come back to normal, and also then now start to communicate with the other nerves and the other tissues that are around it and begin to heal and reestablish all of those communications. And so I think if we think of the brain in a similar way, if we had a scar from an emotional or mental issue, and that we're able to go in with these tools of pulling back the lens a little bit and being able to see a situation that may have happened when you were 5 years old and you were scared when you were at kindergarten. That doesn't mean that when you're 35 years old that same thing should provoke that reaction. But because that scar is still there, you're responding. If you ever have that feeling of like, wow, who is speaking here? Is that my 5-year-old self or is that my mother? Like, where is that coming from? And those scars will hold that energy. And as we start to get a perspective and be able to see where they are in the larger context of our lives, and recognize maybe we read intention, maybe we overreacted, things happen. And we have the power at that point to say, with this perspective, I realize that didn't really matter. All that really matters is what's happening in the present. And if I can respond to a stimulus in the present with my present self versus my 5-year-old self, I can then release that scarring and allow that healing and communication to take place.
The imagery of the angry, isolated, malnourished nerve getting space and nourishment again is just perfect for what happens with this scar tissue mentally, because we have not only the scar tissue or this, programming or record that keeps playing, But in addition, it's given us isolation. It makes us feel not heard and not seen, and therefore malnourished in a way. And so I just love that imagery and applying that to the mind, where we can say, wow, every time I try to get near looking at this habit or this pattern, and I find myself like it's stepping on a nerve, as we say, it's super sensitive, because the thing about scars, like especially like skin scars or whatever, they're tight and they're rigid, and the fibers have grown back all crisscross so that it was stronger than before, which is great in concept, but doesn't necessarily work when you want movement and flexibility and options. And that happens in the physical body and happens in the mental, emotional, spiritual body as well. So to be able to imagine that through these conversations and through just listening to different ways of looking at some things, we can begin to get more neutral. And neutrality is a concept that allows us to get perspective. It allows us to see these, like you said, stimulus, a particular stimulus or an event that is a triggering event. If we can bring in more neutrality, not apathy, that's a step below depression, but neutrality, we can begin to actually see things for what they are, right? Buddha says it is what it is. That's such a great, nourishing sentence, because you can just keep feeding you for your entire life to see not what we want it to be, but what it actually is. And the crazy thing about these triggers or these pieces of scar tissue is that it often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we believe that we're going to go into a situation and it's going to happen just like it has 15 times before. And so therefore we gear up, that nerve is tense, we're tense, and we go in and we have this same experience over and over and over again. So the ability to be able to step back and say, I'm just going to take this situation for what it is and just see what happens, rather than gearing up to create that pattern, can give us a lot of space and a lot of freedom.
Yes, that neutrality is a wonderful word for that. And the other sort of way that I think about this is to be the observer. And so you're aware of your identity and who you are, but instead of being reactive in the moment, you're observing the moment, which you just expressed really well, which is to pull back a little bit, have some perspective, and then let it unfold. And maybe there's a possibility that it might unfold differently than the last 22 times that you had that stimulus. And there's a huge amount of freedom in that, because now, instead of using a pre-programmed script that was stuck in that scar, you've created an opening for something new to happen. And inevitably, that new thing will be something that you couldn't have seen or experienced if you had stayed in that pattern. And so all of us kind of get stuck in patterns. And as we start to be able to see, oh, I just replayed that pattern again. What if I stepped back and let it unfold in a different way and didn't have an expectation? Because I think expectations are a big part of that. That occurs to us as an expectation. Oh no, here it comes again. Every time I try to go here for coffee, the guy cuts me off. So that's like a really physical example of that, but we do that emotionally all the time. And we also tend to read intention into things that may not be there. And if we have that neutrality, we're able to see that and just let it pass by like a film, as opposed to identifying that it's our truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for the logical brain, one of my favorites is, like, you think about Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements, and one of the agreements being don't take anything personally. It's really not about you. It's often about the other person. So just like you were saying, Barb, if you go in with that expectation, really your expectation is all about you.
Totally. It's like, what? Wow, I guess I'm going to react the same way I always have.
That's right.
The
And
other, go ahead.
I was just going to say we become addicted. And I know that sounds like a strange word to use there, but when we think about synaptic pathways being formed, and it's like a horse running around a track. If the horse ran in the same track over and over and over again, and nobody repaired the dirt or built the track back up, fast forward 10 years, and that horse is completely underground running that same track. And so, you can call it becoming addicted to that thinking, and that those sometimes negative feelings that we get out of recreating a situation over and over again, or it just becomes programmed into us, or just such habit. You might ask that horse, why are you still running 10 years later? And the horse could probably say, I don't know what else to do. So hydrodissecting that gives us a little bit of space and neutrality to look back and say, wow, I am that horse in the track. And I have been running this program for a very long time. And I'm going to be neutral to myself. I'm not going to judge myself for having spent 10 years doing this same relationships and patterns and career choices over and over again. I'm going to allow myself the self-love to say, I'm neutrally looking at this, and I see that I'm tired of experiencing this, so I'm ready for a change. And I'm also going to extend to those other people, places, and things an opportunity to step out of it as well.
Yeah, it creates so many more options. One thing I find is useful for people when they first start building this muscle of neutrality and perspective is just little tools like we talked about in the last podcast, taking a minute and grounding, and or just coming into your breath. Just you hear people when you hear yourself, that breath, where you're just sort of letting go of a pattern. And so if you feel that arise, that feeling of tightness and that feeling of constriction and no options that could come out as like anxiety or frustration or anger, if you can just come in to do something very simple, that might be just taking a couple breaths, you can remind yourself that you can come back to that neutral place. And the more often you do that and just practice it, even in situations that may seem trivial, it becomes easier in more challenging situations.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that saying. I walked down the path one day. There was a hole. I didn't see it. I fell in. I climbed back out and I continued on my way. The next day, I walked down the path. I saw the hole and I fell in it. I climbed out and continued on my way. The next day, I walked down the same path. I saw the hole and I walked around it and continued on my way. The following day, I chose a different path. And so this step that you're taking to take the time for yourself to listen to these podcasts are allowing you to take a different path. And the other piece that I'd like to add to this is one thing that I've observed on a physical level that Dr. Cook does very, very well is he has the ability to work with people who have had a long-standing pain, a long-standing set of patterns in their body that, they're just hoping to get out of because it's just been so much of their life spent in pain and dealing with pain and trying to avoid pain and et cetera. And you go into that treatment room and he's going to put on some music. He's going to talk about something completely off the wall that you hadn't expected. And it's going to take your mind out of, I'm in pain, 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 and it's not going to ever stop. And he's talking, he might be talking about Willie Nelson. He might be talking, you don't know where he's going to go, but it is magic because he takes your attention away from the acute pain or sensation or fear of the treatment or whatever it is. It takes your mind over there so you relax And you're able to then open up to not only the physical healing that comes from the work that he does, but the mental healing that comes when you can get neutral to this thing that has been taking up such a huge part of your life. So I just wanted to share that because though it may seem like what we're talking about is not necessarily connected, it's actually the whole pie or of what bio reset is about. It's not just the physical. There's multiple aspects to healing, and having some neutrality, the things that we've been fixated on. Well, awareness that it's something we're fixated on, step one. Step two, being neutral to the fact that we've been fixated on it and start to take a few steps back so that we can see it with more clarity.
And to add to that, I think is very interesting when Dr. Cook is talking about Willie Nelson or quoting song lyrics and how they apply to life, and being and kind of distracting everyone from their whatever they're fixated on. He's grounding himself, and by virtue of doing that, grounding the other people in the room, including the patient and including the staff people, and creating a space for everyone to be in that neutrality, because that's the ideal space for healing. And so we spend a lot of calories in the bioreset environment, creating a place where everyone can have that experience, whether it's the color of the walls or whether it's the music that's playing. And the staff tends to pick that up. And we get lots of comments from people about they become very attached to that environment and call it their happy place, even though when they come in, it might be short term, a bit of a painful procedure because we're freeing off some scar tissue. Their association is that it's very safe and happy place. And so we can do that for ourselves to create that safe and happy feeling in ourselves by simply pulling back and being neutral. And I say simply, but of course it's not as simple as that. It is and it isn't, because we are meaning making machines and we have a lot of reasons why things are. And as we let go of the rationale and the rational brain, we can come into that space of neutrality and safety and healing. I actually have a quick story that I think might illustrate this. When I was very young, in a high chair, my mother turned her back on me, and not for any mean reason. She was washing the dishes, and I fell and got a pretty bad cut in my eyebrow. And I had carried around that scar from young childhood my whole life, and I always had pain and headaches on that side of my head. And I just thought, well, it's a scar, so it's just there. That's going to be how it is. And so whenever I felt pain there, I was like, yeah, there's that scar. And that happened when I fell out of my high chair. I hope nothing like that's going to happen to me again. Oh, there it is again. And he hydrodissected it. And in the moment that I felt that nerve, which was turned out to just be mostly, as opposed to scar tissue, mostly a trapped nerve. So it was a combination of scar tissue and nerve. As that started to open up and that nerve became at ease and able to be neutral and send good information to my brain versus entrapped information to my brain, I also felt a sense of emotional release and forgiveness to myself and to my mother and to the high chair and the situation that created that injury in the first place. And that was the more powerful piece of that than just the physical healing, was the release of the emotions that were stored in that scar. And so even on a physical level, we store emotions in scars. And when we look at our brain, obviously we're storing emotions in these scarred places in our psyches.
Mm, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that story. So, I thought what we might do is a little mental exercise to increase our neutrality, sort of step one of increasing neutrality. So let's just take a moment and maybe find a place to sit down or lay down and close your eyes. Might want to take a couple of deep breaths. Notice the state that you're in, whatever that is, and how easy or difficult it was for you to just take 2 deep breaths. Inventorying where we are in any given moment provides so much information. So, as we have our eyes closed, we're going to use that tool that we learned in our last podcast, which is grounding. So, we're going to imagine the base of our spine connecting us to the center of the planet. So, imagine this grounding cord. Some people imagine it like a tree, a laser beam, a monkey tail unrolling and connecting into the center of the planet. Whatever imagery works for you, use that. Go ahead and allow yourself to be connected to the center of the planet, and that connection to be about as wide as your hips. It's a real big, solid connection. And we're going to let that be our mechanism for releasing anything that we've been holding on to or carrying around with us that's just not serving us right now. So if you were to imagine a light switch off and on, and the switch was for the release mechanism, we're just going to flip it on and let gravity do the work. Tension in your shoulders, down the grounding cord. Shopping list, down the grounding cord. Emails unanswered, down the grounding cord. It does us no good to carry all this stuff with us mentally and take up space when all we can do is what we're doing right now. And right now we're not shopping, we're not answering emails, and we're not having unfinished conversations. We are just being present for just a moment. So let's do that and do it well. And then as you're connected, stuff might come up for you. So the type of meditation that I teach is called active meditation. When somebody told me, 30 years ago that I needed to learn to meditate and I should close my eyes and think of nothing, it made me laugh because that's impossible for me. What I can do is actively direct my mind. So I'm actively directing it to ground right now. And now I'm going to actively observe what comes up. It's kind of interesting to know what I'm carrying around. And rather than try to fuss with it right now, I'm just going to let it ground out of my body. But people, places, things, they can all pop up. And if you would, I'm going to introduce you to a new part of your brain. This is called the center of your head. There are some teachings that would call it the sixth chakra, the third eye. I have no attachment to what we call it. What I like is hanging out in this space that allows us to see with clarity. So if you would go ahead and bring your attention to a place that's behind the eyes and between the ears. So this is a place that if you were to put a finger on your forehead, kind of between your eyebrows, and one directly in the back of your head, and you were to draw a line, the midway point is the center of your head. And if you were to put your fingers right on the tops of your ears, one on each side, and imagine another line where those two lines cross is the center of your head. From this place, we can begin to observe our lives with more neutrality. Some people call this your clairvoyance space, which means voyant to see, clair with clarity. So to see with clarity, we come into this space and we will build on this tool. But for now, allow your thoughts to be there in your brain like an ocean. And we want to be in the sky above the ocean. And so the ocean waves are the thoughts, and they're crashing on the rocks, and some are louder, some are quieter. And we don't want to get hung up on any one wave. We just want to bring our attention above those waves into the center of our head and allow that noise to just quiet in the background. So as we sit here, seeing with clarity and being grounded, this is how we get recentered. You got a big meeting coming up. Take a minute, ground, and get centered. You may see more opportunities in that meeting than you would have seen otherwise. You got a big family event, though not many of us are having big family events right now. Just be prepared by taking a moment, getting grounded, coming above your thoughts, and just observing what happens. Watch it unfold, and then you get to choose how you react. So take another couple of deep breaths. When you're ready, you can open your eyes.
Thank you for that meditation, Kelly. That was really a wonderful way to get neutral. I'm going to use that a couple more times today. Practice that muscle and start building it.
I would say in closing that the difference between being in that part of your brain and experiencing things and just being in that program brain that's just reacting rather than choosing how we want to act would be like driving a car down the freeway. So if you're just reacting to everything and you're not grounded and centered, you are on the hood of the car going down the freeway. And when you're centered, you get to be in the driver's seat with the steering wheel and a windshield to protect the bugs from going in your mouth and your face. So stay tuned, because we will be developing more of these tools and sharing more techniques for hydrodissecting the brain. And until then, be well.
Yeah.